Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Holo and oh my god, I'm excited to talk to you about Mortal Shell, the upcoming Souls-like that we've talked about here on the channel before. When it comes to Souls-like games, firstly, I wish there was a better name for this genre of game, and secondly, I love trying new major Souls-like worlds, especially when there's passion and craft behind them, because sometimes it feels like Souls-like games are pumped out just to get in that genre and pick up on the massive audience that is, well, quite often starved for these types of games. But then other times we do actually get something that has real thought, real drive behind it, and sometimes we get something like Mortal Shell. Thanks to the recent beta, we were able to try out the game and then provide valued feedback to the devs. And I wanted to give you guys my thoughts, my first impressions of the game, the good and the bad, and give it to you straight. Should you care about Mortal Shell? For this video, I'm going to talk about both positive and negative aspects of the game back to back because I actually have a lot of good to say, but I also have some fair concerns too. Let's start with the atmosphere, which is very dark and moody, similar to Souls in its vibe. Many Souls-like series take their atmosphere and go one way or another. A good example is Code Vein, but here with Mortal Shell, they really lean into that dark atmosphere. Because of that, just like my first playthrough of any great Souls or Souls-like game, I have that desire to explore, right? But every step that I'm taking is taken with due caution because of the dangers that lurk around every corner. There's that tense feeling wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, because at any moment I could suddenly find myself in a bad situation. The game is leaning into that horror aspect heavily here. You got the sounds, the creatures, the visuals of the world that we're actually exploring, and it smashes this aspect of a good Souls-like very well. And with that atmosphere, we have that story. The original Souls story is the same as this, mysterious and inviting, pushing you to question the world, the characters, and even yourself. What's going on here? Why is it happening? Which leads you to search for information that can help you piece together the story yourself. Mortal Shell is doing the same thing, or something very similar anyway, where we're unraveling the story by progressing, exploring the world, and paying attention. We can read item descriptions, we can look at the shells, and as we progress shells, by the way, we learn more about that person's history and what they were like in life. I just think the way the story's laid out is brilliant. Speaking of hidden areas though, let's talk about level design now. In the beta, we had access to two main areas in which there was just so many hidden things to find, often well hidden behind breakable terrain or secret tunnels, clever positioning based on how you enter a room for you to turn around and then reveal like an item once you stop and look around. You gotta be on the lookout for different traps, that kind of thing everywhere. It's really pushing the player to explore those details thoroughly. So that's all great, obviously, but with that level design, I want to talk about the size of Mortal Shell, which is going to be significantly smaller than a Souls game. It's going to take much less time to clear these areas out and progress through them, so you'd expect a shorter experience. Like I said, everything I saw in the beta had that polish, had the detail, was filled with secrets. I'm all for it, but it is going to be a short and sweet playthrough compared to the massive journey that we see in Souls, which should be expected. Mortal Shell is actually listed at about £25 or $30 thereabout, which is significantly cheaper than many Souls-like games we see released these days. Now it's time to talk about the all-important aspect of a good Souls-like, the combat. How does it shape up? Mortal Shell makes use of multiple clever new mechanics. Firstly, let's talk about the harden mechanic, where you can instantly use an ability to harden your shell, and it makes you immune to damage and staggers anyone that hits you. You can use it whenever at any time, in between combos, during rolls, literally whenever. You can even use it to stagger an attack. To say the least, it is a simple mechanic, right? But it adds a high skill ceiling for its use, and high level use is both impactful and satisfying. For dodging, we got to see two different types of dodging, the short dashing or full-on rolling when we're in that night mode, or the shadow dash for much greater distance when we're in that rogue shell who has a lot more stamina. Both are able to parry, which staggers opponents, but when you power it up and consume the resource called Resolve, it will do way more damage, knocking enemies to the ground for an easy follow-up at that, and it also drains life to give you a useful heal. Incredibly powerful, but limited by when you have Resolve. Then we have the two shell abilities we had access to in the beta, the sword into spear lunge that we also saw in gameplay showcases, which would do insane damage from a large distance, but also it seemed to have iframes for some reason, which made it really really strong. And with that, we also had the Rogue's AoE spin, where we'd spin on the spot, shooting projectiles in every direction for big bursts too. And again, this gave you iframes. Both these abilities could only be used when spending Resolve though, and you don't really get to use them often if you're healing, which does consume Resolve. So powerful as these things are, they are limited. Finally, we have those combos, which we got to see a few simple different types, like the running attacks, the quick heavy combo, the heavy into quicks. I probably saw about 5 different combos to attack with the sword, and then similar with the hammer and chisel, which by the way, you got to use 2 different weapons in this beta, the hammer and chisel being the faster, more dex weapon, and the claymore being the heavy and strength based one. As you can see, there's a few things going on with this combat, a few different mechanics, and it's definitely satisfying to win fights in this world. But as much as I praise it for these different mechanics, there's actually a concern I have because of the way they've laid it out. I'm worried this combat's a bit one-dimensional. You're often rewarded for spamming out attacks, staggering opponents. You can kind of just do the same thing in the Souls series, where players are known as R1 spammers when they do this. These players are easy to punish in PvP with a well-timed parry, but in PvE, these players leave themselves open to boring and repetitive gameplay if they ignore the many intricate and interesting ways you can fight in the Souls series. This is going to happen in any Souls-like title unless they do something different with the combat. Take Monster Hunter as a great example, and we see Godfall doing this too, where you need to do real, well-timed, intentional combos to get any use out of your weapon. Actively engaging in those detailed aspects of the combat is then rewarded, and when you don't, it's actually punished because you do very low damage. I'd like to see more of that in a Souls-like game. I believe the reason this combat feels one-dimensional is because of that resolve system I mentioned. You do damage, you survive combat, you build resolve. Then you spend it for a powerful parry, a big impactful ability, that kind of thing. But it's very limited and also restricted. If you don't have resolve, which often you don't, you're left with weak and pointless parries, and your combat is basically limited to those simple strings you have access to. Suddenly you only have like 2 ways to fight. You run in and out, or combo and harden as you're about to get hit. Now, because Harden's on a cooldown, a short one, but a cooldown, you would go in whenever Harden's ready and run out whenever it's not, leading to a pattern to combat, which isn't ideal for a full playthrough, a pattern that would last the whole game. Hopefully, as we progress the game and unlock more shells, progress each shell, get more abilities and so on, we'll be able to access more styles of combat and not be limited by resolve quite as much as we were in the beta. Lastly, for combat, let's talk about that hit rate. From the original trailers, I had some concerns about something I seem to talk about all the time lately in games, the feeling you get when you land or take blows. They need to be well animated hits with big impact. In the trailers, we definitely had a sort of concern here about connecting swings and then properly visually connecting, which has clearly been improved since those trailers. In this beta, not only does it look better, but it functions properly. Enemies will react to your hits accurately, stagger from bigger, heavier hits, smaller flinches depending on the size of your weapon and depending on the size of the enemy at that, and so on. It's good, but it isn't perfect. At times it does feel a little weak or even off, but my concerns for this compared to the trailers are fully alleviated, which is very important. And on top of that, I'm really impressed they addressed this concern from trailer feedback so quickly. As a final note on things in this game, I just wanted to say, well done to the voice actors. It was solid. Normally, it's just not as polished and professional in a smaller project like this, and yet I found they did a really good job from the sounds and the nature of various enemies, some really creepy stuff going on, and to the NPCs who we can actually talk with. The friendly merchant and his cat that you can totally pet, by the way, and the totally not a firekeeper, Sister Ganesha, both do a great job.
They foretold a truth more terrifying than any other. Those who glimpse it behold no monster other than an utter lack of meaning.
My conclusion for Mortal Shell is that this was an impressive showing. The devs are commendable for their efforts. Based on the feedback from just the trailers and the gameplay showcase, they made changes before the beta with that hit rate, which is a major and important change. They clearly have their finger on the pulse of the community and take important feedback seriously, so hopefully feedback they receive from this beta will be seen in the full release. And I actually believe it will. This is insane when you look at the countless other Souls-like games that don't even hold a beta before launch, and almost make no changes after launch as well. I thoroughly enjoyed playing Mortal Shell. The movement, the atmosphere, the combat, though I definitely have criticism for it, is satisfying and enjoyable. When you do beat the beta, they let you continue straight away away from the start like a New Game Plus mechanic, and that's exactly what I did. This way I could continue to progress my shells and unlock new abilities or passives and improve my playstyle. I found myself rewarded for understanding the mechanics and leaning into them more, and I'm very excited for the launch of this game. I know I'm genuinely going to play this game and enjoy it as a new Souls-like that has passion and effort behind it. As a Souls fan who's waiting for Elden Ring, it's actually been years since the Dark Souls 3 release, and yeah, Sekiro was incredible, one of my favorite games of all time, but it wasn't a medieval Souls experience, obviously. Mortal Shell kind of provides that style of game and delivers it well. I think a Souls fan should be excited for Mortal Shell. What are your thoughts on this beta and game in general? Are you excited for Mortal Shell? Let me know. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and I'll see you next time.